be very concerned about having an in-out referendum because there isn't any procedure for a member state to leave the EU, and lawyers I've heard discuss it have said it would take something like 20 years, you know, for renegotiations, things like that, because it would be so complex.
The question I'd like to ask is slightly devil's advocate, I think, and it is, what policy of the European Union would you most like to see changed?
The parliamentary candidate here, so I'll fess that up right now. I'd like to know what you think are the three things that the party needs to do to turn around the perception of Europe in this country, which clearly is obviously suffering considerably at the moment. And also, what would you do?
The next issue that this country faces and Europe faces is the silent revolution in digital freedoms. It's completely off topic to other things that have been said, but it needs to be said. Europe is in a position and has the ability to fight for a digital bill of human rights so that individuals are protected online, and that I'm concerned that if Britain was to leave the European Union, that we wouldn't have a say as a lone little island in the middle of the sea on any of those issues. And I just like to know what you guys think.
Try and answer these questions. The in-and-out referendum is absolutely totally valid, and some of the things that the lawyers are saying, it is potentially going to take us 15-20 years to actually go out if we were to vote no. Plus we've got another problem that we're going to have to renegotiate a lot of the trading treaties because the likes of Brazil, India, China, South Africa, Russia aren't going to trade with us on our own. So that's something that's going to happen. In terms of immigration, I already said there's 2 million people in the UK citizens who work abroad, so we have to focus on that. Nigel Farage, I personally think UKIP are the BNP in posh suits, and that's the thing that we have to keep reminding people. Not just focus on Nigel Farage, it's the whole lot of them. They are nasty, homophobic, racist, xenophobic people. What would I most like to change in Europe? Bureaucracy. It's one thing that actually everyone talks about. It's a lot of waste, a lot of red tape, things like that. So that's what I would do, try and cut away some of the waste so we actually spend the money on services and on people in the various countries. 3 things the party needs to do. I think we need to talk about immigration and the positives of immigration, but also listen to people's concerns. We need to talk about the benefits that Europe brings, because we never really talk about what Europe is for. And actually, internally as well, we need to talk about Europe. You know, this election and this selection seems to be the Cinderella selection campaign of the Labour Party. You know, local council elections, parliamentary elections, they're more important than this, because actually, personally, Hustings should have been held in every key seat in the region, and they haven't been, so that's what I do. What would I do personally? Engage with local people. Every vote in this election is going to count. So we need to get every Labour vote out if we're going to have Labour MEPs in Europe. Engage more with young people as well, because in the future, if we don't get young people thinking about voting and elections in Europe, then we're in trouble. And, a bit presumptuous, make sure I get elected so I can go and represent us in Europe.
2 minutes up, okay,
So
digital freedom will have to wait. So.
Voting UKIP because they lack confidence in any of the other parties as a process. It doesn't matter what we think about UKIP or its leader. What we have to do is get people confident in the Labour Party again. What do the candidates feel that the Labour Party can do to get back that confidence?
And that's actually shown when turnouts, people don't go and vote. And I think what we need to do, I think what politicians generally need to do across the board is actually build trust with the electorate and have those difficult conversations, which I think in the past we have shied away from, things like immigration. But at the same time, reminding people just what it would mean to have a Tory stroke UKIP type of government here, because actually only a Labour government can actually make some of the changes that we desperately need in this country. So that's what I would be doing.
This country, and one of the things that's always struck me is there's an awful lot of mythology in this country around the European Union. I mean, some of it has even been mentioned by yourselves there. I don't know which one of you said about there being an enormous amount of bureaucracy and waste in the European Union. Well, if you look at bureaucracy, the actual bureaucracy in the European Union is tiny. It's absolutely tiny. It's about the size of a county council. Most of the perception of that comes from the right-wing media in this country, which the people have swallowed whole. Now, there's an awful lot of mythology as well about how the European Union is not going to, won't allow us to do this. There's over excessive health and safety, over excessive regulation. There's the CAP, there's the fisheries policy, there's all this. But loads of it, as I say, is mythology. So how would you combat a lot of the mythology that's all pervasive in this country around the European Union?
Tons of mythology around Europe. I was the one who actually talked about the waste and things. And there is, what I was actually talking about there, and I think the two questions that were then asked are actually linked. It is where you've got a European Commission that makes a lot of the decisions, but we elect all these members of the European Parliament who are meant to sit as in Parliament. So then it goes back to, democracy. And that's what people can't see, that it feels that we don't actually have a voice in Europe. And so, could it change? Yes, but I think the only way it's going to change is that we actually have more Labour MEPs elected, and we also have then more socialist MEPs, because we have to work in coalitions in Europe. That's the only way we can work. But if there are more socialist MEPs in Europe, then maybe we can actually bring about some of this change, which would actually help others as well. But some of this mythology is the right way first, unfortunately.
I want to ask a question about the impact of immigration on job security and on pay. Something's been worked in trade unions all my life. The very nasty situation occurred at some of the power stations a year or two ago when trade unions were accused of being racist for campaigning against contract labour coming in. And the source of that dispute was the problem about the fact that European law now says that a contract is won by company that's based in another member state of the EU, and it's the wage rates in those countries that actually are the legal minimum, not the wage rates that are the legal minimum in this country. So whilst that law persists, there is always the potential for employers to set worker against worker and undercut pay in the UK. And it is undoubtedly the case that immigration has had an impact on wage rates at the lowest end of the scale. And I think we can't deny that. If we do deny it, then we are denying people's actual experiences of what immigration means for them. So I'd like to sort of comment on that issue. That's a bit of a taboo subject, I think, and that we need to address.
I've already talked about in response to what's going on at the moment. Tesco's in Harlow, the distribution centre, they're moving it. UK citizens are losing their jobs. They're bringing in agency workers from places like Poland, and then they get paid Polish wages, which isn't fair on the Polish workers living in this country, or it's not fair on the British workers here either. So what I would be campaigning for is not just a minimum wage across Europe, but a living wage across Europe, which is equitable throughout Europe. And on top of that, actually, another thing that I would campaign for as well is an equitable retirement age across Europe. Because people complain that in some countries people will have to work longer than in others, and I think it was more equitable across Europe, then working lives and retirement lives would be improved, so that's how I would tackle that.
Yeah, I was wondering how far you thought the EU could go to mitigate the disastrous effects that globalisation has on the very poorest.
Globalisation, I think EU has a massive role to play. The EU holds many trade agreements with the likes of the Indian subcontinent, places like China. That's where all our stuff comes from. And I think what we should be actually asking for is that as part of those trade agreements, that we ask for minimum health and safety regulations, trade union rights, minimum wages, those sorts of things. They should be written in before we will actually trade with those countries, because at the moment we all turn a blind eye, we don't do anything, and we let all these terrible, terrible things happen. Furthermore, I think the EU also has a role to play in things like climate change and how the globe tackles those sorts of things as well. I think we've got a bigger voice being part of the European Union than outside of it.
Douglas?
What strategies will you be using to implement social values in our society? You talked about Bulgaria, and you talked a lot about social values. How will you be integrating that in our society?
Social values, how would I demonstrate those? I joined the Labour Party because I believe in social justice, and I think the European Union has actually given a lot of good things like the minimum wage, working time directive, paid maternity and paternity leave, statutory minimum paid leave. They're all the things that make Europe a tolerant and lovely place to live, actually. And also, I think we also have to remind people that Europe has been a peaceful place for the last 60 years. But I think there is a problem where you've got new countries coming in, places like Turkey, that are abusing human rights. And before they're allowed to join, I think that is one of the things that we need to watch carefully to make sure that people's human rights are protected before they do that. But, I belong to the Labour Party, so I will carry on about equality and human rights. Digital revolution. I think that's something that we do need to look towards, and we need to start protecting, because technology is changing, the world is changing, and we do have to look forward and not back or in the present and see about how the European Union can actually play a role, and those freedoms should actually be enshrined into the Human Rights Act. In terms of what I'm going to say is, I could give you a lot of rhetoric, political rhetoric about why the European elections are important, why I'm standing. But what I'm going to ask you to think about when you actually make the selection of your candidate is, this election isn't just about knocking on doors and campaigning. That's one part of it. Once we are voted in, you are actually going to be electing and selecting a person that is going to have to go and be a parliamentarian in Europe. And it's not a simple, easy task. European policy structures are quite complicated. And I'm not going to say to you that I am an expert. I have a lot to learn. I think I have qualities that could be used in Europe, but when I get there, as a newbie, I am going to be just a little squirt, new person on the block. I'm not going to be sitting on committees and doing massive things straight away. I think the first things I'm going to have to do is actually build relationships with my fellow colleagues from the Labour Party in the UK, and also colleagues with the sister socialist parties as well. And in that terms, I'm going to have to learn to negotiate, learn about their culture, be able to talk in favour of the people of the east of England to make sure that I can deliver for the best of all 6 million people who live in the east of England. It isn't just Labour voters in the east of England, because we are actually representing everybody. And I'm going to say as well, is that next year's elections are important. And they're important because they are the springboard into the 2015 general election. We have to get a good turnout for Labour in the east of England, which I am quite capable of doing, and knocking on doors, visiting both urban and rural areas. Because if we don't, then we've got a huge, huge challenge in 2015, because if we do not win enough parliamentary seats in the 2015 general election, there is no way that we're going to get a Labour government in Westminster. And if we don't get that, then the future of this country looks really, really bleak, to the extent that it makes me want to burst into tears. So that's why I'm going to say that we are going to all have to work together. And I hope that you will all work with me next year in getting that Labour vote out, and I hope that you will select me as your #1 female candidate. Many thanks.